I'm Maya, 31 years old, and I never imagined that buying my first home would become the catalyst for the most devastating family betrayal I've ever experienced. After years of building my career from nothing, I was blindsided when my parents emerged from 3 years of silence, demanding I sell my house to cover my sister Isabella's $275,000 debt. When I refused their family helps family ultimatum, they didn't just cut me off again. They broke into my home and destroyed everything I'd worked for. What they didn't know was that my house held a secret that would ultimately protect me from their schemes. Growing up in suburban Denver, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My parents, David and Patricia Chen, worked steady middle management jobs at a tech company and insurance firm, respectively. We lived in a respectable ranch-style home in Lakewood, never wanting for basic necessities. But beneath that facade of comfortable middle-class stability was a family dynamic that heavily favored my younger sister Isabella from the day she was born. Isabella was the golden child, blessed with striking looks and artistic flair that my parents showcased at every opportunity. Dance recitals, art shows, theater performances, Isabella was always center stage, while my parents beamed proudly from the audience. Meanwhile, I was the practical one, the studious one, the responsible daughter whose achievements earned polite acknowledgement rather than celebration. Maya is so self-sufficient, my mother would tell relatives with a smile that never reached her eyes. She just handles everything on her own. What she meant was that I had learned early to expect nothing because no one was coming to help me. By 16, I was working part-time at a local coffee shop while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, saving every dollar for college because my parents had made it clear that Isabella's education would take priority. She has special talents that need nurturing. My father explained when I asked about college funds, "You're smart enough to figure out your own path." And figure it out I did. I worked 25 hours a week throughout high school, earned a partial scholarship to Colorado State University, took out modest student loans, and graduated with a degree in finance. Meanwhile, Isabella attended the prestigious Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, with my parents covering her tuition, apartment, and living expenses. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a credit union in downtown Denver. The salary was modest, but I was determined to build a stable career. I lived frugally in a shared apartment in Capitol Hill, packed lunches, used public transportation, and slowly chipped away at my student loans while building an emergency fund. We, Isabella, meanwhile, flitted between creative projects in Boulder, calling our parents whenever she needed rent money or supplies for her latest artistic vision. The breaking point came 3 years ago when Isabella convinced our parents to invest in her art studio venture. She'd found the perfect space in the trendy Rhino district that would surely launch her career as a professional artist. My parents, convinced of her inevitable success, liquidated their retirement accounts to fund this dream. $75,000 vanished into Isabella's vision. I watched the grand opening through Instagram posts, unable to afford the trip from Denver. 4 months later, the studio was failing. Isabella had underestimated rent, overestimated sales, and ignored the competitive Denver art market. She called me sobbing one winter evening. "Mom and Dad are tapped out, Maya," she cried. "The studio needs another $35,000 or I'll lose everything. You have savings, right? You always save." Did have savings. Nearly $45,000 accumulated through years of discipline. It represented my security, my future down payment, my proof that hard work mattered. When I hesitated, Isabella's tears turned to anger. "Family helps family, Maya. Mom and Dad sacrificed everything for me. Now it's your turn." When I suggested a business plan or loan terms instead of an outright gift, she hung up. Within an hour, my mother called. "How can you be so selfish?" she demanded. "Your sister is in crisis. This is her dream." "Mom, I worked hard for that money," I tried to explain. "I can't just give it away without some plan for repayment." "So your money is more important than your sister? Than this family?" My father called next, his disappointment cutting through the phone. "We raised you better than this, Maya. Family comes before money." The irony that they'd never applied this principle to my education was apparently lost on them. When I stood firm, My father delivered the ultimatum that would shatter our family. If you can't support this family when we need you, then maybe you're not really part of this family. The silence that followed felt like falling into a void. You don't mean that, I whispered. Make your choice, Maya. Your sister or your money. I made my choice. I kept my savings, and my father kept his word. My calls went unanswered. Birthday cards returned unopened. I started therapy, trying to process the abandonment and conditional love that had defined my family relationships. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that the dynamic had always been unhealthy, that I'd been the family scapegoat while Isabella was the golden child, and that setting financial boundaries wasn't just reasonable, it was necessary. Over the following years, I threw myself into my career. I earned promotions, increased my salary, and rebuilt my emergency fund. I specialized in helping young professionals establish healthy financial habits, finding purpose in guiding others away from the pitfalls I'd witnessed. My apartment became my sanctuary, filled with plants, books, and the peace that comes from making decisions based on your own values rather than fear of disapproval. 2 years after the estrangement, I started house hunting. I'd saved enough for a down payment and qualified for first-time buyer programs. While walking through a charming 1925 Tudor-style home in the Highlands neighborhood, I felt something click into place. The house had character. Arched doorways, built-in bookshelves, hardwood floors that told stories of nearly a century of life. The previous owner had lovingly maintained every original detail. This house has been in the Morrison family for 3 generations, the realtor explained. The granddaughter just moved to assisted living and wanted to find someone who would appreciate its history. I ran my fingers along the original oak trim and gazed through leaded glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the floors. This house felt solid, permanent, like it had weathered every storm Colorado could throw at it. The price stretched my budget, but after years of discipline and a recent promotion to senior loan officer, I could manage it. I submitted an offer that evening, and after brief negotiations, it was accepted. White. The day I signed the closing documents and received those keys was the proudest moment of my life. No one had handed this to me or made it easy. This achievement was entirely mine. The first months were a blur of activity. The house was structurally sound but needed cosmetic updates. I painted every room myself, working evenings and weekends. I learned to install light fixtures, refinish cabinets, and even tackle basic electrical work. Each completed project felt like reclaiming another piece of myself that had been lost to family expectations. As I renovated the house, I built a life around it. I hosted dinner parties for colleagues, joined the neighborhood watch, and befriended my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who shared stories about the area's history. I planted a vegetable garden with tomatoes and peppers, following advice from the local community garden group. These connections became my chosen family, people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. My career flourished as well. The credit union promoted me to assistant branch manager, where I specialized in financial counseling. There was irony in the fact that the boundaries that had cost me my biological family now enabled me to help others establish healthy money relationships. Financial decisions are never just about money, I would tell clients. They're about values, priorities, and self-respect. Understanding those makes the choices much clearer. My house became more than shelter. It was my sanctuary, my achievement made tangible. Each mortgage payment felt like an affirmation. Each improvement reflected my tastes and values, not compromises made to please others. For the first time in my life, I was creating a space that honored my needs without apology. 18 months into home ownership, I had created a life that felt genuinely authentic. The ache of family estrangement had softened from constant pain to occasional pangs. I'd stopped checking my parents' social media and no longer tensed when unknown numbers called. I had accepted that chapter was closed and found peace in the new story I was writing. That's why the call, when it finally came, caught me completely off guard. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I'd just finished watering my seedlings and was preparing dinner when my phone rang with an unfamiliar Colorado Springs number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello, Maya. It's Mom." Contra-loaded spoon I'd been using clattered to the floor. 3 years of silence, and she called as casually as if we'd spoken last week? My heart hammered as conflicting emotions crashed through me. Hope, anger, confusion, longing. "Mom." My voice sounded strange, childlike. "Yes, sweetheart. How are you?" The casualness was disorienting. No acknowledgement of the years of silence, no explanation, just polite small talk. "Says to hear from you," I managed. "Well, we've been thinking about you. Your father and I would love to have you over for dinner this Friday. Isabella will be there too. It's been too long since we've all been together." Too long since we've all been together. As if the estrangement had been mutual drift rather than their explicit choice. I found myself agreeing before I'd fully processed what was happening. After hanging up, I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, trying to understand the invitation. Why now? Why this sudden interest in reconciliation? Part of me, the lonely child who'd always sought their approval, was elated at the possibility of reunion. Another part, the independent woman who'd built this life without them, was deeply suspicious. I called Dr. Martinez the next day for an emergency session. "What do you hope might happen at this dinner?" she asked. "Best case? They apologize, acknowledge how unfair they were, and we start rebuilding a healthier relationship. And what do you think is more likely?" I sighed. "They want something. They wouldn't reach out after all this time without a reason." We spent the session preparing. I wouldn't discuss my finances unless directly asked. I wouldn't apologize for my decision 3 years ago. I would leave if the conversation became manipulative. Simple guidelines to protect the self-worth I'd worked so hard to build. Friday evening, I drove to my childhood home with anxiety gnawing my stomach. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, professional but not flashy, put together but not trying too hard. I brought a bottle of Colorado wine as a hostess gift, nice enough to be polite but not so expensive as to suggest financial excess. The house looked different than I remembered. The lawn was patchy, the exterior paint fading, and my mother's once meticulous flower beds were overgrown with weeds. These signs of neglect unsettled me as I approached the front door. My father answered, and I was struck by how much he'd aged. His black hair was now completely silver, deep lines carved around his eyes, and he'd lost weight that made his clothes hang loosely. "Maya," he said, his expression unreadable. "Come in." No hug, no warm welcome, just a perfunctory greeting that bridged nothing. I stepped inside and was immediately enveloped in jasmine perfume as my mother emerged from the kitchen. "There she is," she exclaimed with forced brightness. She hugged me briefly, then held me at arm's length. "Let me look at you, still so serious. You should smile more, sweetheart." Just like that, I was transported back to every family gathering where my appearance or achievements had been found subtly lacking. I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Martinez's advice to stay centered in my adult self. "It's good to see you too, Mom." "The house looks the same," I offered, though I'd noticed several pieces of furniture missing, replaced by cheaper alternatives. The expensive landscape prints that once hung in the hallway were gone, replaced by family photos and discount frames. "Oh, we've been meaning to do some updates," she waved dismissively. "Never enough time or money for everything." This casual reference to financial constraints raised my guard. We moved to the living room, where I noticed gaps on shelves where decorative objects had once sat. "Isabella's running a little late," my mother explained, pouring wine into mismatched glasses. "She had a client meeting that ran over. But she's so excited to see you." As we waited, my parents peppered me with increasingly personal questions. Where was I living? Still with the credit union? Had I been promoted? Buying a home in this market must be challenging. Was I still renting? I answered truthfully, but vaguely, mentioning my promotion without specifics, acknowledging homeownership without discussing value or location. With each response, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. their interest in my financial situation becoming obvious. "And you're still single?" my mother asked with familiar disappointment. "I'm focused on my career and home right now. It keeps me fulfilled." "Your own home?" my father repeated, his tone unreadable. "That must be rewarding." Before I could respond, the front door burst open and Isabella swept in like a whirlwind. 3 years had changed her little, except to enhance her flair for dramatic entrances. She wore an obviously expensive silk blouse, her hair professionally styled, designer earrings catching the light. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, dropping her leather handbag on the coffee table. "The client meeting ran forever, then traffic was insane." She rushed toward me. "Maya! One of you all grown up and corporate. I've missed you so much." The contrast between her appearance and our parents' diminished circumstances was jarring, as was the performance of sisterly affection after years of silence. I hugged her back stiffly, already certain this reunion had an agenda. Dinner confirmed my suspicions. As we ate a simple meal, far from the elaborate spreads my mother once prepared, conversation kept circling back to finances. Isabella dominated discussion with stories of her latest artistic ventures, name-dropping local celebrities and describing gallery events while simultaneously complaining about the struggle of being creative in today's economy. "The Denver art scene is just so competitive now," she sighed, reaching for her third glass of wine. "And my last gallery partner was such a nightmare, all these hidden fees and impossible terms." "Gallery partner?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "For my new collective," Isabella said, as if it were obvious. "I found an artist cooperative in Berkeley last year. It was going amazingly until all these bills started piling up." My father cleared his throat. "Your sister has had some cash flow challenges recently." "Cash flow challenges," Isabella repeated with a bitter laugh. "That's one way to put it. Try financial catastrophe. The space needs major renovations, the landlord won't cover utilities, vendors are demanding payment, and my business partner disappeared with half our operating funds." I set down my fork. "That sounds serious. Have you consulted a financial advisor or business attorney?" "We don't need advisors," my mother interjected. "We need family pulling together during difficult times." And there it was, the true purpose of this reunion dinner, laid bare in my mother's meaningful gaze. I took a sip of wine, preparing for what would come next. "Prejudice is it?" I asked, looking directly at Isabella. The question hung in the air as my sister suddenly became fascinated with rearranging food on her plate. $275,000, my father finally answered, his voice flat. I nearly choked on my wine. $275,000? How is that even possible? Isabella lifted her chin defensively. "It's not just the cooperative. There were some personal investments that didn't pan out, plus credit cards I used for supplies and equipment, and the renovations on my loft." "You renovated a rental?" I interrupted, unable to hide my shock. "It's an investment in my brand," Isabella snapped. "Clients expect a certain aesthetic. I can't exactly host potential buyers in some dump." My mother reached across to pat Isabella's hand. "Your sister has always had vision. Sometimes being an innovator means taking financial risks." I looked around the table trying to process what I was hearing. "So you invited me here after 3 years of silence to tell me about Isabella's debt?" My parents exchanged glances before my father leaned forward. "We've done everything we can, Maya. We've emptied our retirement accounts, taken out a home equity loan. We've even sold most of our valuables," my mother added, gesturing around the room at the gaps where art and antiques had once stood. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure what this has to do with me." Another loaded silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. "We understand you purchased a house?" The statement was so matter-of-fact, so seemingly unrelated to the previous conversation that it took me a moment to make the connection. When I did, the room seemed to tilt. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I did." "In this market, Real estate values have increased significantly, my father continued, especially for historic homes in established neighborhoods. My stomach dropped as I realized where this was heading. My house is not for sale. Maya, my mother cut in, her voice taking on the cajoling tone she'd always used when trying to convince me to give Isabella what she wanted. Nobody's saying you need to be homeless. But surely you could sell your house, help your sister get back on her feet, and buy something more modest for yourself. The audacity of the suggestion left me momentarily speechless. Isabella took advantage of my shock to press forward. I did some research, and houses in the Highlands are selling for $500,000 plus. Even after paying off your mortgage, you'd have plenty left to buy a condo and save my business. They had researched my neighborhood. They had calculated my potential equity before even speaking to me. The premeditation was stunning. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want me to sell the home I worked years to afford? Give Isabella hundreds of thousands of dollars with no repayment plan and downsize my life so she can continue a business that's already failing? Family helps family, my mother exclaimed, tears welling in her eyes. We've always taken care of each other. Trembling, I asked quietly, when have any of you taken care of me? The question hung in the air like an accusation. My father's face darkened. We put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. You did the legal minimum required of parents, I corrected. Meanwhile, I worked through high school and college while you paid Isabella's way entirely. I built my career and savings alone while you funded her gallery, her cooperative, and apparently her luxury loft renovations. That was different, my mother insisted. Isabella has special talents, and I don't? The hurt child inside me surfaced briefly before I pushed her back down. This isn't about talent. Presumption's about responsibility. I've been financially responsible my entire life, and now you want me to bail out Isabella's irresponsibility. Isabella slammed her hand on the table, making dishes jump. God, you've always been so jealous of me. This holier-than-thou act about being responsible is just your way of feeling superior. Jealous? I repeated incredulously. Isabella, I've worked for everything I have while watching you get endless handouts. And yet I never asked for a penny from any of you. Even now, after 3 years of silence, you haven't asked how I am or what my life is like. You just want what I have. We want this family back together, my father said sternly. This situation could be a blessing in disguise, bringing us all closer. By me sacrificing everything and Isabella sacrificing nothing? I stood from the table, my appetite long gone. No, I will not sell my house. I will not pay Isabella's debts. Her financial problems are not my responsibility. My mother's tears spilled over. How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. Family helps family. You cut me out of this family, I reminded her. Crimson, you made it very clear I was only welcome if I handed over my savings. Nothing has changed except the amount you're demanding. My father stood as well, his face flushed with anger. Trass, it? You'll let your sister lose everything? Let our retirement be destroyed? All because you won't share your good fortune? My good fortune? I laughed without humor. There was no fortune involved. Just work, sacrifice, and smart decisions, none of which seems valued in this family. You ungrateful, selfish child, my father spat. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me in the past 3 years, Dad? Or the 3 years before that? Please. Refresh my memory about all you've done for me. He had no answer, just sputtering rage. My mother was sobbing openly now while Isabella glared at me with startling hatred. I should go, I said, gathering my purse. This was a mistake. If you walk out that door, my father warned, don't expect another invitation. I paused at the threshold of the dining room. You know what's interesting? 3 years ago, you gave me the exact same ultimatum. My sister or my money. And now here we are again with nothing changed. Zen. Maybe the problem isn't me, Dad. Maybe it's that you and Mom created this dynamic where Isabella never faces consequences, and I'm expected to forever clean up her messes. How dare you blame us? Isabella shrieked. This is all your fault! I shook my head sadly. Goodbye. I wish you all the best with your financial troubles, but I cannot be your solution. As I walked to my car, I could hear my mother's wailing and my father's angry shouts through the open windows. My phone began buzzing with texts before I reached the end of their driveway. Selfish. Family helps family. Hope you enjoy your big, empty house while we lose everything. Off my phone, hands shaking as I drove home to the sanctuary I'd built for myself. Only when I was safely inside, door locked behind me, did I allow myself to cry for the family I'd never really had, and now knew I never would. The harassment escalated over the following days. Text messages flooded my phone, over 60 in the first weekend alone, ranging from guilt trips to outright threats. When I blocked their numbers, they called from different phones. Emails filled my inbox. Isabella even created Instagram posts about toxic family members who hoard wealth while others suffer, tagging mutual acquaintances to maximize humiliation. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out, some curious about the drama, others joining the pressure campaign. The family narrative was clear. I was the villain, the cold-hearted sister with a big house who refused to save her struggling sibling. Despite knowing I'd made the right decision, the barrage took its toll. I found myself second-guessing, wondering if I was indeed as selfish as they claimed. Dr. Martinez worked overtime that week. They're using classic manipulation tactics, she reminded me. The guilt, the flying monkeys, the public shaming. These are attempts to control your behavior because rational discussion didn't work. But what if they really do lose everything? That would be unfortunate, but it would be the consequence of their choices, not yours. You're not responsible for fixing problems you didn't create, Maya. Just as the storm seemed to be subsiding, my doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. I peered through the peephole to see my parents standing on my porch, looking subdued and almost contrite. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. What are you doing here? We came to talk, my mother said softly. May we come in, please? Against the warning sounding in my head, I allowed them inside. They stood in my entryway, taking in the home they'd never seen, with poorly disguised assessment. This is lovely, my mother offered. You've done well for yourself. Thank you. What did you want to talk about? My father sighed heavily. We may have been hasty the other night. It was overwhelming, seeing you after so long, and the stress of Isabella's situation has been crushing. We miss you, my mother added, tears welling. All this fighting isn't what we want. We're family, despite everything. Their apparent change of heart seemed suspicious, but part of me desperately wanted to believe it was genuine. The little girl who'd always craved their approval saw this as the opening she'd waited for. I miss what we could have been too, I admitted, but I can't ignore how toxic things have become. Would you show us around? My mother asked, changing the subject. We'd love to see the home you've created. The tour felt awkward but civil. They commented on my renovations, asked about the neighborhood, made small talk that carefully avoided money or Isabella. It almost felt normal, this performance of interested parents, and I found myself relaxing until we reached my home office. This is where I work sometimes, I explained, showing them the room I'd set up with a desk, computer, and filing cabinets. My mother wandered to my desk, eyeing the papers there with obvious interest. So this is where you keep all your important documents? Mortgage papers and such? The casual question sent alarm bells ringing. Some of them, most are digital now. My father opened my closet without asking, noting the file boxes stored there. Very organized. Always were meticulous about your things. As the tour continued, I noticed my mother lingering by the key hook near my back door, where I kept spare keys. She seemed to be mentally noting their location, her eyes darting between the keys and me to see if I noticed her interest. When we returned to the living room, conversation inevitably circled back to Isabella. "We've been thinking about options," my father began cautiously. "Perhaps a compromise that could help everyone."
Such as? I asked, already knowing where this was heading.
"What if you took out a home equity loan instead of selling?" My mother suggested brightly, as if this brilliant alternative had just occurred to her. "You could keep your house and still help your sister." And there it was, the true purpose of their visit, the reason for the sudden change in tactics. They still wanted access to my house's value, just through a different mechanism. A loan that I would be responsible for repaying, I clarified, while giving the money to Isabella, who has demonstrated she can't manage finances. "We'd help with payments," my father offered unconvincingly. "It would be a family effort. Like the family effort to pay for my college? Presumption the family effort to support me when I was starting my career?" Their expressions hardened at my refusal to play along. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said firmly. "You really are determined to see us suffer," my mother said, her conciliatory tone vanishing instantly.
"After everything we've sacrificed for you. Please go," I repeated, moving toward the door. "This conversation is over." To my surprise, they complied without further argument. My father even nodded stiffly as they left, almost respectfully. "In touch," he said. "Think about what we discussed." Their too easy departure left me uneasy. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't the end of their campaign, merely a change in strategy. My instincts screamed that something was wrong, that their reconnaissance of my home had a purpose beyond reconciliation. I double-checked all my locks that night and made a mental note to research security systems. The peace I'd cultivated felt suddenly fragile, threatened by the very people who should have been its most stalwart defenders. 4 days after my parents' visit, I returned home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped as I approached, hearing muffled sounds coming from inside. I pulled out my phone to call 911.
Hesitating briefly, wondering if I was overreacting to a door I might have failed to close properly. That hesitation vanished when I heard a crash followed by my mother's voice. "Check the office again. The deed has to be here somewhere." I completed the call, whispering my address and explaining that my house was being burglarized. The operator advised me to stay outside and wait for officers. But when I heard another crash and breaking glass, something in me snapped. This was my home, my sanctuary, being violated by the very people who should have respected it most. I pushed the door open fully, and the scene that greeted me stole my breath. My living room was in shambles. Bookshelves had been emptied, books thrown across hardwood floors, couch cushions were slashed open, stuffing scattered everywhere, picture frames lay smashed, and scrawled across my wall in what looked like lipstick was a single word: selfish.
"Tread, what are you doing?" I screamed, causing my father to whirl around from where he'd been emptying desk drawers.
"Maya." My mother emerged from the hallway looking startled but not remorseful. "You're home early."
"Early? This is my house. What have you done?" I gestured wildly at the destruction around me.
Isabella appeared from my bedroom, clutching a stack of papers. "Found the mortgage documents," she announced triumphantly before seeing me in the doorway. Her expression faltered only slightly. "You don't understand," my father said, his tone oddly calm given the circumstances. "This is for your own good, for the family." "My own good?" I was shaking now, phone still in hand with the 911 dispatcher listening. "You broke into my house and destroyed my things." "We're teaching you a valuable lesson about priorities," my mother said, as if this explained everything. "Things can be replaced. Family cannot."
Is that what this is? A lesson?
I looked around at the devastation of my carefully curated home. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, these are crimes. Don't be so dramatic, Isabella scoffed, still holding my financial documents. It's just stuff. Stuff you value more than your own sister. The police are on their way, I informed them, my voice steadier than I felt. Instead of looking concerned, my father actually laughed. The police? You'd call police on your own parents? They won't do anything. We're family. We have every right to be here. You have no right to be here. I didn't invite you in. You broke my door and destroyed my property. We made you, my mother hissed. Viciousness in her expression I'd never seen before. Everything you have comes from us. This house, your job, all of it exists because we created you. The twisted logic stunned me momentarily. In that pause, sirens became audible in the distance. You're really doing this, Isabella said incredulously, calling cops on us when all we needed was help.
$275,000 is nothing to you at this house. It's everything to me, I replied. This house represents years of work, sacrifice, and independence that none of you have ever respected or acknowledged. The sirens grew louder, and panic finally registered on my parents' faces. My father grabbed for the papers in Isabella's hands. We need to go, he urged, moving toward the back door. No, I blocked their path. You stay right here and explain to the officers what you were doing. Move, Maya, my father demanded, his voice low and threatening. You'll hurt me too, destroy more of my things. Go ahead, add assault to the charges. Blue lights flashed through my windows as patrol cars pulled up outside. My parents and Isabella exchanged frantic looks, their plan clearly unraveling. This is just a family disagreement, my mother said loudly, as if rehearsing for the police. Nothing for authorities to be concerned about.
A sharp knock at the door was followed by an authoritative voice. Denver Police! Open up! I moved to answer, keeping my eyes on my family. 2 officers entered, taking in the destruction with professional assessment. What happened here, ma'am? The first officer asked. I came home to find my parents and sister had broken in. Reluctance, they've destroyed much of my property and were attempting to steal documents. My voice was surprisingly calm as I pointed to the papers still clutched in my father's hands. That's ridiculous, my mother protested. We're her family. We were just visiting. Did you have permission to enter the home? The officer asked her directly. We don't need permission. We're her parents. The second officer, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, shook her head. That's not how the law works, ma'am. Adult children's homes are not extensions of parental property.
With this all a misunderstanding, my father tried, his authoritative tone failing to impress the officers. We were concerned about Maya and came to check on her. The door was open. And the destroyed furniture, the writing on the wall? The first officer gestured to the selfish scrawled across my living room. She's always been dramatic, Isabella cut in. She probably did that herself to frame us. The female officer raised an eyebrow. And those documents in your hand, did she plant those too? As the officers separated my family members for questioning, the reality of the situation seemed to finally dawn on them. This wasn't going to be dismissed as a family squabble. There would be consequences. My neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the police presence. Mrs. Rodriguez stood on my lawn, concern etched on her kind face. Mr. Peterson from across the street was filming with his phone, having apparently captured my family being escorted to separate patrol cars for questioning. Alec inside, I gave my statement, explaining the history of estrangement, the recent demands for money, the suspicious visit days earlier, and finding him destroying my home today. They were specifically looking for my mortgage documents, I explained. My sister is in significant debt, and they want me to sell my house to pay it off. The officers took photographs of the damage, collected evidence, and assured me they were taking the matter seriously. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate.
Yes, all of them. As they prepared to transport my family to the station, my mother's composure finally broke. "You can't do this to us. We're your parents. Family helps family." "This isn't help," I told her, my voice breaking slightly. "This is abuse, and it stops today." Only when the patrol cars had driven away with my family inside did I allow myself to fully absorb what had happened. Standing in the wreckage of my living room, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the life I'd built, I began to shake uncontrollably. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at my side, wrapping a steadying arm around my shoulders. "You come stay with me tonight, dear," she said firmly. "We'll deal with this mess tomorrow." I nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to speak, and let her guide me away from the broken pieces of both my home and my family. In the days following the break-in, I discovered exactly what my family had been searching for and why they'd targeted my home office with such determination. While cleaning up the chaos they'd left behind, I found an envelope that had fallen behind my desk during the destruction. Inside was a document I'd nearly forgotten about: the historical designation certificate for my house. When I'd purchased the property, the previous owner had mentioned that the house was listed on the Denver Historic Registry due to its architectural significance and connection to a prominent early 20th century builder. At the time, I'd seen this as a charming detail that added character to my home. What I hadn't fully appreciated was the legal protection this status provided. As a designated historic property, my house couldn't be sold without approval from the Historic Preservation Board. Any buyer would be bound by strict renovation guidelines and preservation requirements. Additionally, certain architectural elements, including the original oak trim and leaded glass windows, were specifically protected and couldn't be removed or significantly altered. This documentation explained why my family had been so desperate to find my property papers. A standard sale would have been flagged during the title process, revealing restrictions that would make the house far less appealing as a quick source of cash. They likely planned to use my documents to explore ways around these restrictions or possibly even attempt to forge my signature before these issues came to light. The realization sent me straight to a lawyer's office. Sarah Chen specialized in both real estate and family law, making her uniquely qualified to handle my situation. What they attempted was highly illegal, she confirmed after reviewing my case. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, attempted theft of documents, and what sounds like planned real estate fraud. "What should I do now?" I asked, still feeling shaken. "First, we file for a restraining order. Given the damage to your home and the clear intent to commit fraud, you have strong grounds. Second, we document everything for the criminal case the district attorney is building. Third, we file a civil suit for damages to your property." Over the following weeks, these legal proceedings became my focus. The restraining order was granted without hesitation when the judge saw photographs of my destroyed living room and the threatening messages my family had sent. The criminal case moved forward as well, with all 3 family members facing multiple charges. What I hadn't anticipated was Isabella's reaction when confronted with actual consequences. During the restraining order hearing, she broke down on the stand. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she sobbed. "We just needed the papers to see what options there were. Dad said we wouldn't take anything, just look." Under questioning, she revealed the full extent of her financial troubles: maxed out credit cards, multiple high-interest loans, lease agreements for luxury items she couldn't afford, and a cooperative business that had never turned a profit. $175,000 debt was actually closer to $320,000 when all accounts were tallied. More shocking was her admission that our parents had been enabling this behavior for years, emptying their retirement accounts, taking out a reverse mortgage, and even selling family heirlooms to cover Isabella's expenses. Their financial situation was far more dire than I'd realized, with bankruptcy looming and possible foreclosure. "We didn't know what else to do," my mother testified, her earlier defiance replaced by dejection. "Isabella needed help, and you were the only one with resources left. Did you consider asking me for a reasonable loan with a payment plan?" the judge asked, "rather than demanding your daughter sell her home or breaking in to steal documents?" "She would have said no," my father muttered. "She already refused to help 3 years ago." The setting boundaries is not refusing to help, the judge observed. It's establishing healthy parameters for assistance, something this family seems to struggle with understanding. The restraining order was granted for 2 years with provisions for extension if necessary. Banned from contacting me directly, coming within 1,000 feet of my home or workplace, or discussing me on social media. The criminal charges resulted in probation for my parents and community service for Isabella, along with mandatory financial counseling for all 3. The civil case settled when my parents' homeowner's insurance agreed to cover the damage to my home. The settlement provided enough to not only repair what had been destroyed, but to make improvements I'd been saving for, including a comprehensive security system. As the legal matters resolved, the emotional healing began. The violation of my home had left invisible scars that were slower to heal than the physical damage. Jumped at unexpected noises, checked locks repeatedly, and slept poorly for months. But with time and continued therapy, these reactions began to fade. My community proved to be the greatest source of healing. Neighbors I'd barely known rallied around me, helping with repairs and checking in regularly. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade tamales every Wednesday. Mr. Peterson installed motion sensor lights around my property. Colleagues covered my workload when court appearances required time off. These connections formed a support network stronger than any I'd known growing up. Unlike the conditional love my biological family had offered, these relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine care. 8 months after the break-in, my house was not only restored but improved. Fresh paint covered the hateful word that had been scrawled on my wall. New furniture replaced the damaged pieces. The garden flourished under Mrs. Rodriguez's expert guidance, and most importantly, the sense of security and peace I'd cultivated was gradually returning. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Isabella had entered a serious financial counseling program and was working at a retail job for the first time in her life. My parents had downsized to a small apartment and were adjusting to retirement without the cushion they'd expected. These changes, while difficult for them, were perhaps the first steps toward healthier patterns. 1 year after the incident, as the restraining order approached its midpoint, I received a letter from Isabella, forwarded through my lawyer as permitted by the court. Unlike her previous communications, this one contained no demands, accusations, or guilt trips. Instead, it offered what appeared to be a genuine apology. "I'm sorry for what we did to your home and your trust," she wrote. "I'm beginning to understand how my financial choices affected everyone and how unfair our expectations of you were. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm working on myself and taking responsibility for my actions for the first time." I didn't respond immediately. The apology was a positive step, but trust, once shattered, couldn't be instantly restored by words alone. I decided to wait and see if changed behavior would follow the changed rhetoric. The experience had taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by respect, support, and healthy boundaries. The people who showed up for me during my darkest moments, who helped rebuild not just my home, but my sense of safety, were my true family. As I sit on my restored front porch on warm evenings, watching fireflies dance across my garden, I feel a sense of peace that was hard-won. My home remains my sanctuary, made stronger by the challenges it has withstood. And I remain my own person, no longer seeking approval from those who proved they couldn't give it unconditionally. Have you ever had to protect yourself from family members who felt entitled to what you worked hard for? The journey from guilt to self-protection is never easy, but sometimes it's necessary. What would you do if faced with this impossible choice between family loyalty and personal boundaries?